The day off. Tom decided to take Friday off to extend his weekend. His boss, who also happened to be his father, kindly allowed him to leave early on Thursday so he could pack and hit the road sooner. The trip to Darren's estate would take at least 3 hours, considering the highway traffic and the narrow, winding roads leading to the property. Tom had high hopes for the weekend. The past 2 months with Janice had been rough. She had become moody, snapping at him without any apparent reason. And as for their intimate life, it had dwindled significantly. What used to be an exciting 3 or 4 times a week had become a reluctant, perhaps once every 2 weeks affair. As a caring and loving husband, Tom tried to help Janice through whatever was troubling her, but she brushed him off, insisting she would handle it on her own. The situation became even more unbearable when Janice constantly rejected his attempts to initiate any form of physical contact. She now often flinched when he tried to hug or comfort her. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong, and a part of him wondered if she might be having an affair. Then she told him they were invited to her boss's country estate for the weekend to celebrate her promotion. "A promotion at work?" Tom asked, bewildered. "You never mentioned anything about a promotion at work. How long has this been in the works?" "For a couple of months now," Janice replied, her voice tinged with guilt. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. So that's why you've been so distant with me lately?" "I think so. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to be so difficult," she said apologetically. Tom smiled and pulled her into his arms, though his heart sank a little when she flinched slightly. "I can imagine," he said, though doubt lingered in his mind. "And to think I was worried you might be having an affair." He felt her tense for a brief moment before she quickly relaxed. "Of course not, Tom. I would never do anything like that to you," Janice said, but something about her tone sounded unconvincing. "I'm glad to hear that," Tom replied, trying to push aside his growing unease. "Because that's something I couldn't tolerate." "I know," Janice said quietly. "So do you think you can get off early on Friday? 4 days out in nature would do us both good." "Sure, I have plenty of vacation time. We can leave on Thursday after I finish work if you'd like." "That would be wonderful," Janice said with a warm smile. "I'll let Darren know, and by the time you get home, everything will be packed. I promise this will be a weekend you'll never forget." Tom pondered her words as he filled his new pickup truck with gas. A weekend he'd never forget? He could only hope she meant that in a good way. But a part of him felt conflicted, especially after a rather serious conversation he had earlier with his father and uncle. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and headed into the house. True to her word, Janice had packed everything and prepared it for loading into the truck. He checked his bags, ensuring his belongings were packed and ready to go. He was impressed that Janice had even packed his toiletries into his travel bag. "Wow, you've packed enough for a week," Tom joked when she walked into the room wearing cut-off shorts and a t-shirt. "I thought we were just going out of town for the weekend?" "You know me. I like to be prepared for everything," she joked back. "Why don't you load up this stuff, and I'll finish up here?" Tom noticed sandwiches on the counter, and that Janice was assembling a picnic basket with snacks and drinks for the road, just like she always did when they took weekend trips. "Sounds great," Tom said with a smile. "Maybe this will turn out to be a good weekend after all," he thought. He loaded everything into the truck, helped Janice finish packing up the food, locked up the house, and set off for what he fervently hoped would be a great weekend getaway. "This weekend promises to be the best of my life," Janice exclaimed as Tom drove. "Trust me, you're going to have a great time." "I'm looking forward to it," Tom replied, hoping she was serious. It took longer than expected to get out of the city due to a highway accident that brought traffic to a standstill, delaying them by nearly 2 hours. But it didn't dampen Janice's cheerful mood, which pleased Tom. He refueled once more as they got back on the road leading to Darren's estate, then drove along the winding road through the hilly, wooded terrain. It was well past midnight by the time they reached the gates to Darren's expansive 2-story house. Janice had the gate code, and soon they pulled up to the massive brick mansion. "Wow, that's a freaking huge house," Tom exclaimed. 3 men in dark suits and sunglasses approached the truck as Tom turned off the engine. Tom wondered aloud, Why do they need sunglasses in the dark? I can grab our luggage, Tom offered, opening the pickup's rear door. Either way, thanks. No, sir, it's our job, said one of the men in a humorless tone. Another man reached out his hand. The keys, sir. I need to park your car, said the other man. Please, just do as they ask, dear, suggested Janice in a tone that made it clear he should obey these men. Tom looked at the man requesting the keys and noticed a distinct bulge on his jacket, indicating he was armed. Of course, Tom said grimly, handing his keys to the second man, while the other two men briskly grabbed his luggage and disappeared into the darkness without a word. Thank you, Tom said mechanically as he watched the men effortlessly carry the heavy bags up the steps. Are you coming? Asked Janice. Yes, of course. On my way, Tom replied, following Janice and the two men up the stairs, puzzled as to why they needed to be armed. Something about this just didn't seem right. Ah, there you are. I hope you had a safe journey, boomed a tall man with dark curly hair as they entered. Tom recognized him as Darren Hansen. He had met Darren a few times at corporate holiday events. Before Tom's eyes, Janice and Darren exchanged hugs. Then Darren turned to Tom. Thomas, glad to see you again. I'm Darren Hansen, he introduced himself, extending his hand. Welcome to my humble abode. Thank you. Nice to see you again, Mr. Hansen, Tom said, shaking Darren's hand. No need to be so formal, Tom. Can I call you Tom? I have a feeling we'll be seeing much more of each other, Darren said with a slight smile. Especially now that your wife is advancing in the firm. Of course, Tom replied, trying to hide his unease. Sorry we're late. There was an accident on the highway, explained Janice. Yes, I heard about it, Darren said. I'm glad you made it here safely. Are the others here? Janice asked. Others, Tom thought. He didn't know there would be others here. Yes, they're all here. Unfortunately, they decided to turn in early, wanted to get a good rest before tomorrow's celebration, Darren replied. The man who had taken Tom's keys returned through the front door and handed them back to Tom. Thank you, Tom said, putting the keys in his pocket. By this time, the two men who had taken their luggage returned from the second floor. Harold, escort the Jacksons to their room if you would, Darren ordered. Yes, sir, said one of the sturdy men. We'll see you early tomorrow morning, Darren said. Sweet dreams. Thank you, Janice said softly, modestly lowering her eyes. Tom noticed, but didn't say anything. He just filed it away in the back of his mind. Maybe Dad was right, he thought. Right this way, please, commanded Harold in a dead, creaky voice. Tom and Janice followed the man up a spiral staircase and down 2 corridors before stopping at a locked door. He pulled out a key card and held it to the reader, and Tom heard the door unlock. Harold opened the door and gestured for them to enter the room. Oh my, sighed Janice as they stepped inside. The room was spacious and well-furnished. There was even a private bathroom with a double vanity and a large television monitor on the wall opposite the queen-sized bed. A gas fireplace dominated one wall. It's very nice here, said Tom with forced cheerfulness, looking around. I'm glad you approve, said Harold. He pulled out 2 key cards, handing one to Janice and the other to Tom. These are your room keys. Please keep them with you at all times. Breakfast will be served tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. Good night. Good night, Janice replied as Harold exited the room, closing the door behind him. It's a really nice room, commented Tom, walking around and taking inventory. Yes, it is, agreed Janice, as Tom began to hang his clothes in the closet. Janice unpacked her things, but Tom noticed she simply placed her bag of clothes in the closet without taking anything out beforehand. So, who are these other people that Darren mentioned would be here? He asked. Oh, just some big shots from the company, Janice replied, not looking at him. And this new position, what exactly does it entail? Tom followed up. I'm Darren's new executive assistant, Janice told him. It comes with a significant pay raise, but from time to time, I'll have to travel. Is that okay with you? As long as it doesn't disrupt our life, Tom said. You know, we've talked about starting a family. I know, but I might have to postpone that for a while, Janice said quietly, at least until I settle into my new role. What kind of time frame are you talking about? Tom asked. I'm not sure, maybe 6 months, maybe a little longer. Are you okay with that? She asked. I know this job is important to you. Tom replied neutrally, wondering about the implications of this position and knowing they aren't getting any younger. You have no idea, Janice told him. This is a huge step for me. All I ask for is a little time and patience." "Fair enough," Tom said, wrapping his arms around his wife. "You know I'm very proud of you, don't you?" "Really?" Janice asked in a quiet voice. "Of course," he replied, kissing her on the lips. "I love you, Janice. I'll never forget that." "I love you too, Stone," she replied. After they climbed into bed and turned off the light, Tom reached out to Janice, but her eyes were closed and she seemed to be asleep. He sighed, knowing this had been her habit for the past 2 months. Disappointed, he turned onto his side and fell asleep. The sky was clear, dark blue, without a single hint of a cloud. The sun was high, and a gentle breeze blew from the south. Suddenly, the sky darkened and was covered with large, menacing clouds. The light breeze turned into a sharp wind that grew stronger with each moment. A deep rumble was heard as the sky darkened and clouds gathered. In the distance, a brief flash of lightning was visible as storm clouds thickened and the wind intensified. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the ground right at his feet. When he looked down, he saw a beating heart, pumping blood onto the ground. Tom had seen this dream many times, except for the beating heart. And every time he experienced it, someone he knew would die within the next 72 hours. The last time was 3 years ago. 2 days later, his older brother Andrew was killed by a drunk driver on the spot. A year before that, his mother had a stroke just 12 hours after his dream, and she passed away within 24 hours without regaining consciousness. Sitting up in bed, Tom was drenched in sweat. He glanced at the digital clock on the bedside table and saw that it was 4:15 a.m. Though it was very early, Tom knew he had to reach out to his father. Grabbing his phone from the bedside table, Tom noticed that he had no signal. He carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake Janice, put on his pants and a shirt, then slipped on his shoes. Grabbing his key card, he opened the door and saw one of Darren's armed guards at a small table in the hallway. The man in a dark suit and sunglasses looked up as Tom opened the door. "Any issues, Mr. Jackson?" asked the big man. "I need to use the phone, but there's no cell service here," said Tom. "Who are you planning to call?" "I need to call my father." "It's important," Tom told him. "This way, sir," said the man, getting up. Tom followed him into a smaller room adjacent to the corridor. "You can use this phone," he added, pointing to the phone on a small table next to a chair. "Just dial 9 for an outside line." "Thank you," said Tom, settling into the chair. He began dialing his father's number and noticed the man standing in the doorway. "Could I have some privacy, please?" "Of course," said the guard, turning away from the door. Tom couldn't believe the patience of this person. And why was he armed? He finished dialing the number and waited. His father picked up after the third ring. "Hello, who is this?" asked his father. Tom could tell the elderly man had just been awakened. "Hi, Dad. It's me, Tom. Sorry to call so early. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I was in the middle of a very nice dream, remembering your mom, but I'm okay, Tom." "Did you have another one of your dreams?" "Yes," Tom said quietly. He heard his father sigh on the other end of the line. "The same kind you had before Andy's accident?" his father asked. "Exactly the same," said Tom. "I see. Thanks for letting me know, son. I'm fine, but I'll keep my ear to the ground. Why don't you try to get some more sleep?" "Okay, I will, Dad. I just wanted you to know," Tom told him. "I appreciate that, son, but I'm okay. I promise you'll have me around for a while longer," his father assured him. "Remember what I said and watch your back." They ended the call, and Tom returned to his room. "Everything okay?" asked the guard. "Yes, everything's fine. Thank you," Tom said before opening the door to his room. He undressed and climbed back into bed, and Jan sighed, turning to face him. "Where did you go? Is everything okay?" she asked sleepily. "Yes, everything is just fine. I had to call Dad," Tom said. "Oh," she groaned before rolling over again. From her breathing, Tom could tell she had fallen asleep once more. He closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him for another hour as he continued to ponder the troubling dream. Tom got out of bed at 6 a.m. and headed to the bathroom to attend to his morning duties. Afterward, he quickly showered, then changed into clean jeans and a polo shirt. Jan followed him into the bathroom, first opening the blinds. Approaching the nightstand, Tom picked up his watch, wallet, and glanced out the window. He noticed wrought iron bars attached to the outside of the window and wondered why they were there. There was no balcony, and the concrete pad of the driveway approach should have been at least 8 meters high. Looking outside, Tom saw a helicopter landing on a pad at least 50 meters from the house. He hadn't noticed it before, but it had been dark when they arrived last night. He also noticed guards carrying what looked like rifles over their shoulders. Tom couldn't help but wonder, was Darren expecting trouble? "Are you ready for breakfast, dear?" asked Jan as she emerged from the bathroom. "Ready as ever," said Tom, checking his wristwatch. "What happened last night?" she asked. "Another dream," said Tom. "You mean like before your brother was killed?" "Yes, exactly the same. I called Dad to make sure he was okay." "How is he?" she asked. "Great. I caught him in the middle of a dream." "I bet," chuckled Jan, which seemed vaguely unsettling to him as she finished getting dressed. "Oh well, let's go downstairs and have breakfast. I'm starving." "Don't forget your cane," she reminded Tom. The cane had been a gift from his father, given to Tom after he was discharged from the hospital many years ago. During his service in Iraq, the Humvee in which he was riding was hit by an enemy RPG. 2 other Marines in the vehicle were killed instantly, while Tom and another Marine managed to escape. Despite severe injuries, the 2 Marines were able to take cover and defend themselves until help arrived. Tom spent months in an operating and rehabilitation center and eventually was medically discharged. Fortunately, doctors saved Tom's leg, but he had to have his left thigh replaced. The rehabilitation center helped Tom learn to walk again, greatly aided by a cane. Although he could now move normally, he still experienced pain after prolonged walking, so he continued to use his father's gift. They approached Darren's table and found 3 more men and a woman waiting for them. Tom had briefly met these men before and knew they were Darren's law firm leaders, although he couldn't recall their names. He had never seen or met this woman before. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce my husband, Thomas Stonewall Jackson," announced Jan. Tom shook hands with the others. "Stonewall, huh? That's quite an unusual name," remarked Glenn Oldman, one of the firm's leaders. "My parents were big fans of Grand Ole Opry back in the day, so they named me after their favorite country and western singer from the 50s and 60s, Tom replied. "Dad used to joke that it was either that or Michael." "Stonewall Jackson." "Yes, I think I recall that name," Glenn replied with a smile. "He passed away about 10 years ago, didn't he?" "That's what I heard," Tom replied. The woman smiled as Tom took her hand. "I'm glad to finally meet you, Mr. Jackson. I've heard a lot about you. I'm Eva Carson," she said. "Nice to meet you, Miss Carson. Please call me Tom. I hope you've heard at least a few good things." "So what do you do at the firm?" Tom asked. "I'm in charge of training and staff recruitment," Eva told him. "And please, don't hesitate to call me Eva. I've heard a lot of good things, and I have a feeling we'll be spending a lot of time together this weekend." "Oh," Tom asked, "why is that?" "With Janice's new position in your life, there will be a lot of changes," Darren announced before Eva could respond. "She's here to help you adjust." "Adjust? Why should I have to adjust to my wife's promotion?" Tom asked, more than concerned. He looked at Janice, expecting an explanation, but none came. "It's complicated," Darren stated flatly. "Let's have breakfast first, shall we? Maybe we can get to know each other a bit before we get down to business." They sat down as Darren's staff wheeled carts into the room. Before Tom's eyes, they set dishes of eggs, bacon, toast, and fruit in front of everyone. Another staff member went around the table, pouring coffee into cups. Tom also noticed the armed guards who took up positions on both sides of the door. "So, Tom, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?" Rick Harmon, another executive director, asked. "Janice mentioned you were some kind of soldier or something like that." Tom glanced at Janice before responding. He had briefly told her about his service, but it seemed to have slipped her mind. As far as she could tell, anyone in a green uniform had served in the military. "I served in the military, but I was never just a soldier," Tom replied, taking a bite of his omelet, which he found delightful. "Oh, what were you then?" Rick asked, glancing at Janice. "I served in the Marine Corps," Tom answered. "Thank you for your service," Darren said. "What did you do in the Marines, if I may ask?" "Certainly," Tom said. "I was a reconnaissance sniper. I was assigned to a reconnaissance unit in the armed forces where I was injured." "A reconnaissance sniper, huh?" Ryan Jones, the third leader at the table, pondered. "So, essentially, you were killing bastards. Is that right? Tom noticed the other executives and security service personnel exchange glances before responding. I suppose that's one way to put it, Tom said. The looks around the table turned uneasy, and Tom wondered what was going on here. 32 enemy soldiers didn't fulfill their missions, he added casually, but with a tone resembling a warning from a venomous snake. Though it's been years since I've had to kill anyone, his military mind chastised itself. Had he revealed his position or warned them? It's interesting that you never told us about this, Darren said with a hint of tension in his voice, looking at Janice, who blushed slightly. Janice isn't to blame, Tom said before Janice could speak. I never told her exactly what I did in the service, partly because some of it is still classified and partly because it's a period of my life I'd rather forget. But now you're an accountant, is that right? Rick hastily interjected, stepping in to diffuse the tension that had suddenly settled over the table like a cloudy day. Yes, I was discharged after rehabilitation, and I went to college to get a business degree. That's where I met Janice. Now I'm a forensic accountant working for my father, Tom explained. What does your father do? Glenn asked. He heads Jackson's specialized investigations, mostly corporate work, Tom replied. I've heard of them, Rick mused. From what I've heard, they do good work. They finished breakfast, engaging mainly in light conversation, but it didn't ease Tom's uneasy feeling about it all. He'd learned to trust his instincts on the battlefield, as they had saved his life more than once. Well, it looks like a beautiful day outside. Eva, why don't you give Tom a tour of the house while we head out to the backyard? Darren suggested. Of course, Eva replied. Tom glanced at Janice, trying to read her thoughts, but couldn't. Her expression was one he wouldn't want to play poker against. Go ahead, dear. Everything will be fine, she encouraged, though a bit strained. Yes, okay, Tom said. He felt uneasy in this situation, but he sensed there was little he could do right now, so he yielded to Darren and Janice. Intelligence and reconnaissance, he repeated to himself. Taking his cane, he looked at Eva. Are you ready, Tom? She asked briskly, a liveliness he knew to be fake. Of course, Tom replied, hoping the turmoil in his stomach would settle. After you, Janice placed her hand on his shoulder before he left, causing him to stop and look at her. Just remember, I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Tom said. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned away. Shocked and humiliated, Tom stepped back and walked away without saying a word until he and Eva were far from the main house. Tom couldn't help but notice the heavily armed guards nearby. Turning his back to Eva, Tom pulled out his phone and activated the voice recording app. Noticing he somehow had 2 bars, a weak signal, but enough to make a call, then pocketed it. It's so beautiful here, Eva finally said, trying to break the ice. Yes, Tom replied evasively. They approached a wooden park bench overlooking a small pond and stopped. Eva sat down and Tom followed suit. What's going on here? He asked. You're a smart man, Tom. Why don't you figure it out yourself? She replied. I have an idea, but it's too awful to consider, Tom replied. Why don't you just tell me everything? All right, as you know, Janice has been chosen as Darren's next executive assistant, Eva began. Yes, I already know that. Janice told me about it. But that's not all, is it? No, Eva said. Your life is about to change, Tom. Whether it's for the better will depend on how you react. You know that Janice loves you, don't you? I've heard her say it, but honestly, it's hard for me to believe right now. Trust me, she really loves you, and she wants the best for both of you. That's why she's willing to do whatever it takes to secure your future, lectured Eva. You do support your wife in her career goals, don't you? Of course, I always have, said Tom. He felt much like he did one night many years ago, slowly crawling through the ground, feeling for mines under a high-tech heat-dissipating cloak. I'm glad to hear that from you. Then you must understand that the next year or two will be just a minor bump on the road to a long, happy marriage. A year or two. She mentioned 6 months. Why are you saying this? What's going to happen in the next 2 years? Tom asked pointedly. And what exactly is your role in all of this? I'll get to that. My role is to prepare you for what's coming and to ensure that you fully understand and accept Darren's expectations for you and your wife. Why should I care about Darren's expectations of me? I don't report to him, and he doesn't sign my paycheck, Tom growled, his patience wearing thin. No, he doesn't, but he signs hers, and your silent agreement will greatly facilitate Janice's work, explained Eva. Silent agreement? What the hell are you talking about? I'm sure you've noticed that Darren is what most people would call an alpha male, stated Eva, as if it were as obvious as a giant flashing red neon sign. In other words, he's an egotistical, self-absorbed jerk, growled Tom. Eva smirked, and it was the first genuine sound she made, and the first one he believed. Let's just say he expects people to obey, to do what's expected of them. This includes Janice, and as a result, you. In other words, he wants to sleep with my wife and expects me to just accept it. Isn't that what you're trying to tell me? His temperature rises, but he keeps it tightly under control. I wouldn't use that terminology, but essentially yes. In fact, they've already been intimate. Several times, said Eva, noting the pained expression on Tom's face. And how do you know this? Tom asked. I was there. I recorded it, said Eva in an even tone, as if recording the sex of two people was the most natural thing one could do. Are you kidding me? Not at all, Tom. Here, take a look. Perhaps you'll find it interesting, said Eva, handing her phone to Tom. He watched a short video clip in which Janice and Darren were having sex like animals. This is interesting. Do you mind if I keep a copy? Tom asked. It could come in handy for him in case of a divorce, he thought to himself. Not at all. I saved this clip specifically for you. Using the phone's Bluetooth function, Tom saved a copy onto his own phone. Tell me something, Tom. How has your personal life been lately? Not that it's any of your damn business, but for the past couple of months, it's been practically non-existent. Why do you ask? Actually, it is my business, and the reason is simple. Darren instructed Janice to keep you at arm's length most of the time. He's very protective of his possessions. What? And she just went along with it. Tom growled through. Of course. Now he owns her. She obeys him, just like all his previous assistants did, and he'll expect you to report to him as well. Tom bristled at the word owns. He could feel his anger boiling beneath the surface, but he kept it tightly controlled. He can expect in one hand and crap in the other, Tom snarled through clenched teeth. Let's see which one fills up first. Eva smirked again, a cold, calculated expression that made Tom's skin crawl. It's not just about expectations, Tom. Darren's a man who gets what he wants, and he's not afraid to use any means necessary to secure his desires. You need to understand that if you resist, it won't just be you who suffers. Janice is fully aware of what's at stake. Tom's mind raced, trying to piece together what Eva was saying and what she wasn't. So what does this jerk really want from me? Money? Power? What? Obedience, Eva replied simply. He expects submission from you. He'll demand that you publicly acknowledge his authority over you and Janice. And it won't just be in words, Tom. Tonight, in front of the other senior partners, he expects you to, well, let's just say, he expects you to prove your submission in a very personal way. Tom's blood ran cold as he understood the implications of what Eva was saying. You mean he wants me to humiliate myself in front of everyone, to degrade myself in front of my wife and his cronies? Eva nodded slightly. Yes, that's exactly what he wants. And Janice, she's expecting it. She's been conditioned to see this as necessary, as part of securing both of your futures. Tom's hands clenched into fists. And if you refuse, Darren will destroy you. He has ways of making sure that anyone who crosses him regrets it deeply, and he won't stop at you. He'll make sure Janice pays the price too. You need to think carefully about what you're willing to risk here, Tom. Tom took a deep breath, his mind working furiously. The stakes were high, and the consequences of any decision he made could be devastating. But he also knew one thing. He wouldn't let this man, this predator, control his life or his marriage. Let me make sure I understand, Tom said slowly, his voice tight with controlled fury. Darren expects me to hand over control of my marriage, my dignity, everything, just so he can satisfy his sick fantasies? And he expects me to just accept it, to let him trample all over my life? That's exactly what he expects, Eva replied calmly. He's done it before, and he'll do it again unless someone stops him. Tom's mind snapped into sharp focus. And what if I decide not to play by his rules? What if I decide to fight back? Eva's eyes narrowed, her smirk fading as she realized Tom was serious. If you fight back, you better be prepared for the consequences, Tom. Darren's not a man to cross lightly. He'll come after you with everything he has. Tom stared at Eva, his resolve hardening with every word she spoke. "I'm not afraid of him," he said quietly. "I've faced worse than this, and I've come out alive. He may think he owns my wife, but he doesn't own me, and I won't let him have her either." Eva's expression faltered for a moment, and Tom could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Tom. I hope you know what you're doing." Tom stood up, towering over Eva as he looked down at her. "I know exactly what I'm doing, and it starts with making sure Darren Hansen never lays a hand on my wife again." With that, Tom turned and walked away, leaving Eva sitting alone on the bench, staring after him with a mixture of fear and admiration. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he headed back towards the house, his mind racing with the realization that he was about to go up against a man who had ruined lives without a second thought. But Tom wasn't backing down. He was a Marine, trained to fight, and he'd be damned if he let some corrupt corporate executive destroy everything he held dear. As he approached the house, Tom's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his Uncle Bob. "We're in position. Ready when you are." Tom's lips curled into a grim smile. He had a plan, and with his family by his side, he wasn't going to lose. He paused for a moment, taking one last deep breath before pushing open the door and stepping into the lion's den, ready to face whatever came next. Tom entered the house with a steely resolve, his mind focused on what he needed to do. As he stepped into the grand foyer, he noticed the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only heightens tension. He made his way to the dining room, where he knew Darren and the other senior partners were waiting. When Tom entered, Darren was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Rick, Glenn, Ryan, and Janice. Eva had evidently warned them, as all eyes turned to Tom with an air of expectancy. Darren smirked, clearly confident in his control over the situation. Janice's expression was hard to read, but Tom could sense a mix of fear and resignation in her eyes. "Ah, Tom, there you are," Darren said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "We were just discussing the arrangement." Tom didn't respond immediately. He walked slowly around the table, his gaze fixed on Darren. "I've been thinking about this arrangement, Darren," he said finally, his voice steady, "and I've come to a decision." Darren's smirk widened. "I'm glad to hear that, Tom. I knew you were a reasonable man." Tom stopped at the side of the table close to Janice. "You're right, Darren. I am a reasonable man, and that's why I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this, to end this insanity before it goes any further." Darren chuckled, clearly amused. "Tom, I think you misunderstand your position here. I'm not the one who needs to walk away." Tom's eyes narrowed. "No, Darren, you're the one who doesn't understand. You think you can just take what you want, destroy lives without consequence. But you're wrong." Darren's expression darkened, the smirk fading. "Is that a threat, Tom?" Tom leaned in slightly, his voice low and cold. "It's a promise. You've pushed too far, and now you're going to face the consequences." Before Darren could respond, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. The doors to the dining room burst open, and Sheriff Bob Jackson entered, followed by a squad of deputies, all armed and ready. "What the hell is this?" Darren barked, his face contorting with anger. Bob stepped forward, his gaze icy as he looked at Darren. "Mr. Hansen, you and your associates are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and numerous other charges. We've got enough evidence to put you away for a long time." The room erupted into chaos. Darren jumped to his feet, but two deputies immediately restrained him. The other senior partners tried to protest, but they were quickly subdued and handcuffed. Janice sat frozen, shock and fear etched on her face. As the deputies secured the room, Bob walked over to Tom, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Good job, son. We've got everything we need." Tom nodded, his eyes still on Darren, who was now struggling against the deputies, spitting threats and curses. "You'll regret this, Jackson. I'll destroy you." Tom stepped closer to Darren, looking him directly in the eyes. "No, Darren, it's over. You've lost, and you'll never hurt anyone else again." Darren's fury twisted into desperation as the reality of his situation sank in. The man who had controlled so many lives was now powerless, and it showed in the wild look in his eyes. Bob gestured to the deputies. "Get them out of here." As Darren and the others were dragged out of the room, Tom turned to Janice, who still hadn't moved. He felt a pang of sorrow for the woman he had once loved deeply, but that love had been shattered by betrayal. Janice finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." Tom took a deep breath, the weight of everything that had happened settling on his shoulders. "I know, Janice, but what's done is done. We can't go back." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What happens now?" Tom looked at her, the hurt still raw but mingled with a sense of closure. "Now I move on. We both do, but separately." Janice broke down, her sobs echoing in the now empty room. Tom watched her for a moment, then turned away, walking toward the door. Bob caught up with him as they stepped into the hallway. "You okay, Tom?" Bob asked, his voice filled with concern. Tom nodded, though he felt the exhaustion of the past few days catching up to him. "I will be, Uncle Bob. I will be." They walked out of the house together, the cool night air a welcome relief from the tension that had filled the mansion. As they reached the driveway, Tom paused and looked back at the house one last time. It was over, and though the future was uncertain, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that Darren's reign of terror had come to an end. Tom got into his truck, ready to leave the estate and the nightmare behind. He glanced at his phone, seeing a message from Marcia, the woman he had met at the 4th of July barbecue. "Hey, Tom, just checking in. Hope everything's okay. Looking forward to seeing you again." Tom smiled, feeling a warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. There was hope for the future, and he was ready to embrace it. With one last look at the mansion, Tom started the engine and drove away, leaving the past behind and looking ahead to a new beginning.